Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones, back here today to put some finishing touches, some final thoughts, and have plenty of discussion about Purdue's 2021-22 season as it came to an end on Friday with the 67-64 loss to St. Peter's in the Sweet 16. Disappointing end, no doubt, and we have so much to talk about. Today's episode will be pretty much solely about the St. Peter's game and looking back on this season, putting a cap on what was one of the most talked about seasons in the history of Purdue basketball. Next week, we will go ahead and take a look at what's to come for Purdue basketball as they move on from this and move forward. But today is going to be all looking back on this season, essentially. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about everything. First, if you don't already, follow the show on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. Plenty of discussion there. Still going to be talking about all things Purdue sports, even though we have a long wait until football season kicks off for there to be more games for us to break down here. And subscribe. We're going to be coming at you all year long. We're not going to take breaks around here, so subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Pods, Spotify. If there's a different one that you listen to Boilers and Beyond on, it's probably there, Google Pods, Stitcher, all of the different platforms, so subscribe wherever you're listening to this. So, St. Peter's 67, Purdue 64, puts an end to the 2021-22 season for Purdue. It certainly did not feel any better for Purdue fans after watching North Carolina roll over the Peacocks in the Elite Eight. I'm recording this here a little after 7 o'clock on Sunday. I just got done watching that. That game wasn't close, so that doesn't help if you're a Purdue fan trying to cope with this and come to grips with this. But look, it was the story of the season for Purdue. Purdue's vices came back to defeat it once again here. This time, it ended their season. The first few times, it ended their number one ranking. It put them in a tough spot in the Big Ten. It cost them the Big Ten. It cost them the Big Ten tournament. And now it cost you the NCAA tournament. And leaves a real feeling of emptiness to this season. First and foremost, it's the turnovers. I went ahead and looked, and it wasn't as crazy as I thought. In Purdue's losses, it averaged 13.6 turnovers per game. Overall on the season, it averaged 11.8, so I'm sure that 11.8 probably gets down to about 11 or so if you take out the losses of what they averaged in wins. I didn't have time to really go through all of that necessarily, but look, when Purdue's lost games this year, it's been because of turnovers, and it's been different at times. Like the game at Michigan State, Purdue turned it over a boatload just throughout the game. The game at Indiana, Purdue has 10 turnovers in the first half. It only had 12 that game, but those 10 turnovers in the first half kept Indiana in it and got them off to a lead that they ultimately held on to for the most part. Against St. Peter's, you had 15 of them, and it adds up. 6 of them from Jaden Ivey, 5 of them from Zach Edey. That means only 4 of them came from the rest of the team. I thought St. Peter's had an excellent game plan of attacking Zach Edey in the post and really made him make plays with the ball that he's not the most comfortable with. You saw some of his inexperience come out. And by that, I mean, the guy still only played basketball for 5 years or so. Trying to make those decisions when he's being swarmed, especially by a bunch of smaller guys who have their hands down by the ball, who are in his face, it's not easy, especially for a younger player. They did a great job there. This isn't something that the Big Ten does a lot of because there are so many other big men in the league. But, it was very effective for them. St. Peter's really pressured Purdue's guards, especially Jaden Ivey. When he put the ball on the floor to go to the rim, they did a nice job collapsing on him and making him make complex reads. He's done well at times doing that this season, but they showed a lot of different looks at Jaden Ivey and made him find open guys. He really struggled doing that, and I think there was certainly frustration. It wasn't his best game shooting the ball, only 1 for 6 from 3. A really frustrating game for Jaden Ivey, and you saw that at times too, because not all of his turnovers were forced. There was the biggest killer of them all was Jaden Ivey driving baseline when Purdue's up 4 with less than 5 minutes to go, and it just simply goes off his leg and out of bounds. That's a killer, and that's a play that really puts this game together for Purdue and shows you what this game was. Purdue shot 42% as a team. That's okay. That's not up to this team's standards. They didn't shoot well, and we've got more to come on the three-point shooting because that's another issue that's been a vice of this team at times. But, Purdue shot 42%. They turned it over on 23% of their possessions. If you can cut that 15 turnovers down to 10, you're getting at least 5 more shots at the basket. Assuming you don't get any offensive rebounds, which Purdue did a pretty good job of offensive rebounding against this team. If you don't get any of those, you still get 5 more shots. And at 42%, you make 2 of them, you're getting either between 4 and 6 points there. And it would have been a much different game if when Jaden Ivey dribbled the ball off his foot, when Purdue was up 4 there, it's a lot different if Purdue's up 8. Whole different ball game. And because Purdue turned it over so much, that margin for error wasn't there. Purdue didn't rebound well on the defensive end. Purdue won the rebounding battle by 11 here. And I don't want to take away from the fact, that fact. Because, yeah, Purdue out-rebounded them by 11. But that doesn't tell you the whole story of this game. Because St. Peter's was still able to get 8 offensive rebounds. That's too many. It really is. Against this group, a group that doesn't have size at all, and you have Zach Edey, you have Travion Williams, you have Mason Gillis, all guys who can go get rebounds, little underwhelming. And that turned into some second chance points for St. Peter's. Kind of drives me nuts. Okay, they got 8 second chance points here. Not as many as I may have thought. That was my first time seeing that, if you couldn't tell. But still, that hurts. And that's just more time that St. Peter's has the ball, when instead, if Purdue gets that rebound, they can push. And when you're getting that rebound, you're not letting St. Peter's set up their defense as well. Purdue had a lot more success when they were just getting the ball and going, rather than when St. Peter's would score or the ball would go out of bounds and they could set up that full court defense. It slowed down Purdue from getting into their offensive sets, and that really hurt. It's the little things. It's the little things that do this to you. And again, this is another one that really hurt. I mean, some of these too that don't count as offensive rebounds, there are a few times where Purdue just dropped rebounds. The ball gets into Purdue's hands and it pops out and goes out of bounds, and St. Peter's keeps possession. I mean, all of that stuff is just a killer. And when you're trying to win in the NCAA tournament, you can't have those little things stack up the way they did. All season long, Matt Painter had talked about in press conference after press conference, what's this team going to do when the three-pointers don't fall? Because It's going to happen sometimes. That's the nature of being a team that relies on the three-pointer a lot. Sometimes they're not going to fall. And I think he said this quite a bit to try to fire up his team on the defensive end more than anything, because you have to grind out games on defense when you're not making shots. Purdue didn't do that well. Purdue goes 5 of 21 from 3 in this game. If you take Sasha Stefanovic out, he was 3 for 7. You take Stefanovic out, that's 2 for 14 from outside. That's really bad. You had good looks for good three-point shooters in Mason Gillis and Eric Hunter Jr. They both go 0 for 3. Jaden Ivey, a good, not great three-point shooter, goes 1 for 6. The one that went in was with 8 seconds left to keep Purdue on life support in this game. But, it just wasn't enough. And Purdue had shot the ball well from 3 all season. They didn't shoot it as well down the stretch, I guess, but you needed more than that. And that ultimately caused Purdue to rely on the inside game. And your bigs go 12 for 22. That's good. I'm not going to say that's bad. You're above 50%. It's not bad. But you have a big-time advantage down there with size. And with the exception of that little spurt where Travion Williams had like 8 straight points or something, Purdue didn't really enjoy a massive advantage down there. Yes, Zach Edey was 5 for 7, but those turnovers killed you. And, he had 7 shot attempts and 5 turnovers. That's not a good ratio whatsoever. Travion Williams was good. He had a good day. You could tell, how much this ate at him after the game. He's a kid who really wore his heart on his sleeve at Purdue a lot. But, with this matchup advantage Purdue had, they needed to be better than 12 for 22 inside. They simply didn't get it. And at the end of the day, you look at these vices that have plagued Purdue all season. They turned it over a lot. They didn't rebound well. Three-pointers didn't fall. And that's not as much of a vice as it is a basketball reality, but that's still something that went wrong. And at the end of the day, St. Peter's outplayed Purdue. They out-hustled Purdue. It seemed like every loose ball ended up in the Peacocks' hands instead of Purdue's. Shaheen Holloway got them ready to play, no doubt. He had a really good defensive game plan. He was very good at making Edey and Ivey think, and that didn't go well for either of those guys. He did an excellent job in running Eder around and forcing Purdue to foul him more than anything. It's not like Eder had a good shooting day. He only made 1 field goal, but Purdue sent him to the free throw line a lot. It's a deep St. Peter's team. It was very interesting because you are rarely going to see what you saw when 5 or 6 minutes into the game, Shaheen Holloway goes with a hockey substitution, puts a whole new 5 on the floor. That's rare for a mid-major, to have 10 guys that you're willing to put out there. Not that all 10 of those guys are studs by any means, but pretty crazy. You don't see that much. They didn't back down one bit. They deserved it. They played tougher than Purdue. They played harder than Purdue. They played more composed than Purdue. And, look, Purdue's turnovers allowed St. Peter's to dictate the pace of this game. You saw that in what we just watched, assuming you watched the UNC St. Peter's game as well. UNC didn't let that happen. UNC didn't turn it over. They got shots up quick. Their guards got to the rim. Brady Manick knocked down threes. North Carolina dictated the pace of that game. That's not what Kentucky was able to do. That's not what Purdue was able to do. That's not what Murray State was able to do. Now, Purdue and Murray State certainly aren't up-tempo offenses. Kentucky plays a lot through their center as well. So that tells you something, but St. Peter's absolutely controlled this game, and they deserve to win. It is as soul-crushing of a defeat as you're ever going to find. I think that's the best term I can use to describe this, soul-crushing. Look, Purdue hasn't had a whole lot of luck come their way in previous NCAA tournaments. It's like we were talking last week on the show. The only time under Matt Painter that Purdue's had anything but chalk in their region was when they got the 11 seed VCU back in 2011. And Purdue got beat by them in the second round. Other than that, it's always been chalk. Purdue's always played the highest possible seed. This year they didn't. They got to a 15 seed in the Sweet 16. You cannot ask for anything better. You end up on the wrong side of history. For the first time ever, a 15 seed got to the Elite Eight. They did so by beating Purdue. There were some times in this game where Purdue could have gotten some separation. I thought Purdue had an awful first half. 9 turnovers in the first half. Sasha Stefanovic kind of kept them afloat, but Purdue leads by 4 going to halftime. And if you're a Purdue fan, you're thinking, all right, I don't know how much worse this could have gone. Then St. Peter's comes out and starts the second half on an 8-0 run, and you realize that this is going to be a battle. Purdue's going to have to grind their way to a win. Purdue's up by 4 with less than 5 minutes to go. Travion Williams misses a shot. Purdue gets a stop. Jaden Ivey dribbles it off his leg. Stefanovic fouls a 3-point shooter. Eater, he makes all 3 free throws to cut it to 1, and it goes to the under 4 timeout as a 1-point game. Instead of, you get a shot by a good post player that doesn't go in, you get a turnover from your best player, and you commit a dumb foul. And those fouls were absolute killers. There were countless of them. Eric Hunter had one when Eater was just getting into the action on a play, and Eater goes to the line. I don't remember if that was the one that he missed the front end of a 1-and-1 or if he made both, but that was a killer. Mason Gillis gets whistled for, rightfully so, he gets whistled for a foul with 3 on the shot clock on a loose ball over 22 feet away from the basket. That one hurt. It's about 42 seconds to go or so. And instead of Purdue getting the ball down by 2, they're getting the ball down by 4. And it's just stuff like that. St. Peter's knocked down all of their free throws, basically. They go 19 for 21. That's fantastic. You have to give them credit there, but it's that every time Purdue put themselves in a good spot, they turned it over, they missed a shot, they did something, they committed a foul. It's just every time Purdue couldn't close off St. Peter's. They couldn't put themselves in a spot to where St. Peter's was going to have to make shot after shot. St. Peter's made a ton of free throws down the stretch. They didn't make a ton of field goals. That hurts when you're Purdue. St. Peter's shot, what did they shoot in this game? 38.9%. You outshot them, but you gave them too many opportunities, and you didn't give yourself enough opportunities because you turned the ball over way too many times, and you couldn't do the little things well enough to survive and advance, because that's all this tournament is. It's survive and advance. Just ask Villanova and how they made the Final Four despite shooting like 28% against Houston. It's just survive and advance in this thing, and Purdue couldn't do the small things well enough to do that. So here we are. It is probably the Monday after, if you're listening to this. Obviously recording this the Sunday night. It'll be up for you Monday morning. So it's the Monday after the season ends. It is the classic time to look back. And if you want to call this season a disappointment, I really can't argue with you one bit. We said it all along, all season. This team is too good to not put something in the rafters of Mackey Arena. And other than number 23 going up for what should be a consensus All-American season, that's going to be about it. There was no Big Ten regular season championship. There was no Big Ten tournament championship. You lost in the Sweet 16 to St. Peter's. You didn't make the Final Four to put a banner up for that. Look, it's a disappointment. I think I absolutely can see if you want to call this season a disappointment, I can't argue with you one bit. In reality, this team went 29-8, but everything changed for this team when they beat Villanova. I've said that all month long, essentially, but it's true. Purdue went on that run in the second half to come back and take down Villanova. And at that instant, this became almost a Final Four or bust season because it had been since, it's still been since 1980, but right away, Purdue fans saw what looked like a team that could get to the Final Four. And it's such a Final Four starved fan base, rightfully so, that became it. The entire season was going to be defined by what Purdue did in the NCAA tournament. And that's why, even when Purdue lost out on the Big Ten regular season title, and when they lost to Iowa in the Big Ten tournament game, I kind of said, look, it's a bummer, and I always maintained that something should go up in the rafters for this team, that obviously they should earn it. You don't just put a banner up for nothing. But what was really going to be what this team was remembered by was the NCAA tournament. And, the expectations were high, and this team didn't deliver on them. I'd wondered if, maybe during Big Ten play, it hurt Purdue, just that, they had so much roster continuity that everyone knew it was coming. That probably wasn't even a remotely smart thing to think because Purdue beat itself. Other teams didn't beat Purdue. Purdue beat itself. This wasn't one of your typical Purdue teams. And I think that's something that caused frustration for a lot of folks, and rightfully so. Especially the folks that have been around Purdue for longer than I have even. Hell, I'm 23. There's a lot of people who have religiously followed Purdue basketball for a lot longer than I've been alive. But this isn't a good defensive team. And, there's a defense lives here sign in Mackey Arena. Defense did not live within this group at all. The offense had potential to be completely lethal. You saw it in stretches, but you're not going to be firing on all cylinders on offense every game. You have to be able to defend. Certainly part of Purdue's defensive issues were personnel-based. I think part of them were maybe attitude-based. And what I mean by that is just a lack of a killer instinct, maybe. I can't be too critical because these guys care. These guys wanted to win more than anyone, more than any fan out there. These guys wanted to win. But the defense just wasn't there. And while I thought it got better throughout the season, it was never at the level it needed to be. And it was the stat that got thrown around all year long by the national college basketball media is the KenPom adjusted defensive efficiency number. Purdue was right around 100 for most of the year, spent some time over 100. They were in the 80s coming into the St. Peter's game. I don't know what they're at now, but that defense lives here. It didn't live with this team, and that played a big role in this team losing. Again, this team went 29-8, so I think it's difficult to really just criticize and wail away. But yeah, there was nothing significant this team won outside of that little tournament in Connecticut. And in hindsight, when Purdue was playing in November and December, and much more November than December. Purdue didn't play anybody. And, North Carolina's in the Final Four. That is a night and day different team right now than what Purdue faced up in Connecticut back in November. Purdue played an okay North Carolina team there, and Purdue beat them, but they gave up 84 points in the process and won in a track meet. Purdue beat Villanova. That was a game Purdue won fair and square. Purdue went on a run late in the game to win it. You can't take that away from Purdue. Villanova's a Final Four team. That's part of what makes this hurt, is that you beat half the Final Four. But other than that, your non-conference schedule is horrible. And that's no fault of Purdue's. I know they were in some contract situations with teams that they'd been scheduled to play the year before and had to roll over to this year because of how COVID impacted non-conference scheduling last year. But Butler was horrible. I still think as of now, Lavelle Jordan still has a job. That makes no sense to me, but Butler was bad. North Carolina State, who you went to overtime with in a game you probably deserved to lose, they finished dead last in the ACC. Florida State, Purdue got them when they were really banged up. I don't think Florida State really ever got healthy. I'm pulling up their final results right now, but it wasn't good. They went 17-14, 10-10 in the ACC, complete middle of the pack. It's not a great Florida State team. You played a couple of decent mid-majors, I guess, in Wright State, Bellarmine, but at the end of the day, Purdue didn't get tested a whole lot. Purdue's wins early on were against a bunch of teams that weren't really that good. I don't know that. I think we all probably overreacted a little bit back in November to that Villanova game, more than anything, is what we overreacted to. But that's all you can do at the time. When we got into Big Ten play, you saw some of the realities come out. I think I disagree with the notion that this is the most talented team that Matt Painter's had at Purdue. I really don't agree with that. I would love to hear an argument that this team's more talented than the 2009-2010 team that had 3 All-Americans and a Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year on it. And I think that team a few years ago, when you had the 4 seniors, Thompson, Matthias, Vince Edwards, Isaac Haas, with a sophomore Carson Edwards, I'd probably go with that team as well over this. That team played much better defense, and they were just as lethal offensively, really. So I don't know that I ever agreed with that sentiment. Purdue's depth didn't really hold up throughout the season. Some of the streakiness there hit. Some of the lack of consistency there hit. Playing 10 was always going to be an incredible challenge and a probably unrealistic one. We found that to be the case. So at the end of the day, Purdue probably flew a little too close to the sun early on in the season. People rightfully got excited. And ultimately, I think the way the season started compared to how it ended, I believe this. This was one of the least enjoyable seasons of Purdue basketball that I've been a fan through. And in a different sense than what the 12-13 and 13-14 years were. Those years sucked because the team sucked. Plain and simple. The 13-14 team was dead last in the Big Ten, and you really saw no hope after that year before the transfer exodus got there. But, look, I asked you guys on Twitter, did you enjoy this season or not? 63% of you said yes, you enjoyed it. I don't think there are a lot of other instances where a team's going to go 29-8 and you're going to 37% of its fans are going to say, no, I didn't really enjoy it. But I got to be honest with you. I don't know that I really enjoyed this season either. It's no fault of the players. It's no fault of the coaching staff. I think this is just the year where expectations were very high. Folks got very emotionally invested. There was a lot of vitriol on social media this year about this group. It was a constant sense of anxiety, of negativity. I think Purdue fans went after individual players more than I remember. It was a lot this year. There was a lot of anxiety, I think is the right word to use, inside the fan base. And a few of the responses, two that stuck out the most to my poll on Twitter. Larry brought up that after UNC and Villanova, nothing was good enough. And I take that two ways, and I agree with both of them. Number one, the performances simply weren't good enough. Those were kind of Purdue's two best performances of the year. And I agree there. And nothing was good enough in the sense that the expectations were so high that even the rest of those wins weren't good enough. Even beating Illinois at home in a massive game, beating Illinois on the road in a massive game. Jaden Ivey hits a fadeaway buzzer beater to beat Ohio State on CBS, big time. It wasn't enough. And I agree. I agree wholeheartedly there. And the one that spoke to me the most was from Boiler in Texas. And he said, the losses ruined my week, and the wins were more of a relief than a celebration. And he said that in the context that he did enjoy the season, but the wins were more a relief than a celebration. 100%. I could not have said that better myself. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I just think that's an excellent way of putting it. And look, it's a disappointing end to a season that had a lot of promise, had a lot of intrigue, but had a few small things gone better. Maybe Purdue's still playing right now. Maybe folks are heading down to New Orleans. But at the end of the day, disappointing end to what for a lot of folks was a disappointing season. All right, I wanted to hop into our Q&A now. Even after losses, we're not going to stop doing the Q&A. Your questions are always welcomed and always valued. It's one of my favorite parts of the show. Kicking us off here. At times this season, it felt like Matt Painter's offense didn't necessarily maximize players' strengths on offense. Excuse me, particularly Jaden Ivey. What do you think needs to be done to better maximize players' strengths? And I also had a question kind of related here about Jaden Ivey. How's he a top 5 NBA prospect? I think in terms of maximizing players' strengths and why Jaden Ivey is such a good NBA prospect is that he's a downhill player on offense and needs as much lane to work with as possible. Purdue has a true post-centric center on the floor all 40 minutes. That doesn't help. Those two don't go together as well. The downside of that is that, what do you want to do? Jaden Ivey is an All-American, and you have two All-Big Ten big guys down there. It's not like you're going to take them off the floor, but those two don't necessarily go as well together. Jaden Ivey shot better from 3 this year. What did he end up at? I need to find this because early on in the season, Ivey was shooting 46% from 3 at one point. That wasn't sustainable. It certainly was not. He finished the season about 36%. So decent, still a good year, much improved from his freshman year, but not dynamic enough that he could really shoot more than he could drive to the rim. And that's what made Carson Edwards so effective at Purdue. And, the comparisons of Carson Edwards and Jaden Ivey are a bit difficult because they're so different players. But I don't know there's a ton in the offensive system because it didn't necessarily fit Jaden Ivey's strengths, but my goodness, did it fit about everybody else's. It fit Purdue's big men very well. It fit Sasha Stefanovic. It fit Eric Hunter. It fit Mason Gillis. Probably doesn't fit Caleb First as well yet, but I think things are going to change when he's playing the 5 rather than the 4. So I agree with you that it probably didn't fit Jaden Ivey the best, but, I think something that fit Jaden Ivey better, and we saw it more as the season went along, that there were more ball screens for him. There was more isolation for him. Purdue's offense wasn't as firing on all cylinders the second half of the season. The last 2 months of the season, it wasn't as lethal as it was earlier. The ball was in Ivey's hands more later in the season. They ran less set plays, fewer quick hitters to get someone open. The ball was in Ivey's hands to go make a play more. And at the end of the day, it was better for him. His numbers went up, but it didn't always help everyone else. He's going to be great in the NBA, though. I can promise you that. Well, not promise, but I have a very strong feeling he's going to be excellent in the NBA just because that game suits him so much better than the college game does. About the St. Peter's game, why did Newman not play? Ethan Morton only received 4 minutes and Thompson play 13. What excuse is there for that? Excuse is a hard word because I didn't make the decision, but Isaiah Thompson and Brandon Newman are very difficult to compare because they don't play the same position. Isaiah Thompson's a point guard, and Brandon Newman is an off-ball guard. Newman isn't the strongest with the ball. He's not a great ball handler. And the way St. Peter's pressured the ball, I can absolutely see why this may not have been the best matchup to play him in. I fully get that. Now, could his shooting have helped? Absolutely. But you've got to get the ball across first. Against a full court pressure team, you got to get the ball across. And it wasn't Purdue's other guards that committed the turnovers, really. You had one on Isaiah Thompson. That's it. That's it. You had one on Gillis, one on Williams, one on Thompson. So, Ethan Morton only playing 4 minutes was probably a bit surprising. He went defense-offense a little bit with Stefanovic late in the game. Sasha Stefanovic was knocking down shots, though. He was really your only one that was. Granted, he cooled off in the second half, but I don't think this was a game where I think the wrong players were in. I just simply think at the end of the day, Purdue, you need your best players to be your best players. And Jaden Ivey didn't have a great game. Zach Edey didn't have a great game. That puts you in a tough spot. And I know it's not going to stop, but it's been a long season of Isaiah Thompson being the scapegoat. He's not an all Big Ten player by any means. I don't know that he's necessarily the guy you want to come into next season with Sharpied in as your starting point guard, but I don't think he really lost you any games this year. But he's an easy target, and people like to go after that. So I get it, but I feel for the kid because he doesn't really deserve a lot of what comes to him, in my opinion. It's hard to realize, and this is another question, hard to realize that this was probably a 5-year ceiling team in their build cycle. The result is a nationally televised embarrassment. Where to find optimism? The 5-year ceiling kind of confuses me. This team was in the Elite Eight 3 years ago. 4 years ago, they set the school record for wins, and Isaac Haas got hurt. But if you're looking at this group of players, I think is where the question comes in, because this is kind of the defining season for your seniors of Williams, Hunter, Stefanovic, and Jaden Ivey, because he's gone. He's an NBA guy now. They didn't accomplish what you had hoped. They're one of the few very good groups in Purdue history that's going to leave without a Big Ten championship banner in Mackey. I guess you can count the 3 seniors because they played on the team that won it in 2019, but you get the point. It's different. I do think that it's different because when Jaden Ivey, Zach Edey, and Ethan Morton got to campus during the summer of COVID, I don't know that anyone was expecting Jaden Ivey to be a top 5 pick 2 years later. And I know, and you can listen to my old episodes, it's true for me, no one expected Zach Edey to be all Big Ten in his second season. So those guys developed quicker than I think anyone thought. But yeah, it's a bummer for this group that this is how it ended, that this season just didn't bring a championship of any sort. In terms of optimism, Purdue's in the hunt more years than not. And I know that's not enough for people, but that's a reason for optimism. I mean, Purdue's never terrible. Purdue's not Nebraska, who is the worst team in the Big Ten by far. You lose a lot, but in the transfer portal era, things can change quickly. It's a double-edged sword because things can turn on your program very quick in a hurry, but you can change quickly. And if Purdue adds a piece or two and things change in a good direction, this is a team that can compete next year probably. We'll talk more about that next week, but there's plenty of reason to be optimistic moving forward, but there's plenty of reason to be disappointed right now, and I think that's where a lot of folks are. Question, will Purdue ever make a Final Four? What does Purdue need to do to get there? How do teams like VCU, George Mason, Butler, Auburn, Texas Tech, Baylor make Final Fours, but Purdue doesn't? What do those programs have that Purdue doesn't? And I was told that I'm not allowed to say that it's hard to do to make a Final Four. Well, yes, I think Purdue will make a Final Four at some point. Now, I don't know when that will be. I don't know. I really don't. But some of these teams that were used as examples, I mean, VCU, George Mason, Wichita State, South Carolina, that were in the question on Twitter. I mean, South Carolina was a 7 seed. They got hot. That coach got fired a couple weeks ago because they've been horrible since. Wichita State had a great group. But that ended up in that coach getting fired for pretty much everything under the sun in terms of abusing players and things like that. I don't think Purdue fans really want that. VCU and George Mason, 11 seeds that got hot. VCU's a good program. Shaka Smart's a solid coach. When's the last time you heard of George Mason? It was probably this tournament in reference to 2006 because Jim Larinaga made another run. But those are 11 seeds that got hot. And, in terms of the teams that you brought up, Auburn, Texas Tech, Baylor, right there, 3 elite coaches. Bruce Pearl, Chris Beard, Scott Drew, all very good coaches. Bruce Pearl runs sketchy programs. That's long been known. Purdue will never put up with that. They've got athletes. The the emergence of basketball in the South lately has certainly been interesting. The SEC is far more competitive than it's ever been. Texas Tech, again, great coach, some really good athletes, a great defense. Baylor, Scott Drew performed the greatest rebuilding project in sports history there. He took over that program in probably as bad of a spot as you could ever imagine. And if you're a younger listener to this and don't know what happened, just look up the Baylor basketball scandal with Dave Bliss. It's the craziest story you'll ever read. I think it's a Showtime documentary about it. It's freaking nuts. And I think that's a difficult spot to compare Purdue to as well. But, it took Scott Drew, 17 years or so to get to his first Final Four? And he won the title that year, but he's only been to one Final Four. So, what do these teams have? And I don't remember George Mason all that well, but look, guard play helps. You had Jaden Ivey, an elite guard, and it didn't work this year. But I don't know that, you look at all these teams as templates to build after. And I think to some degree, this is a Big Ten wide problem. Let's face it, another lousy year for the Big Ten in the tournament. Purdue and Michigan make the Sweet 16. Both fall short. Not much good went the Big Ten's way this year. Illinois, gone in the round of 32. Ohio State, gone in the round of 32. Wisconsin, gone. Iowa, gone in the round of 64. Indiana, 64. Rutgers doesn't get in the bracket. Michigan State loses in the second round. It's a Big Ten wide problem. I think every year it becomes more of an indictment on the Big Ten. And I know the Big Ten cronies aren't going to like hearing that, but let's face it. Wisconsin was national title good in 2015. Past that, who else was? Michigan State in 19, maybe. I never thought Michigan last year was going to win the national title. 2020, the Big Ten didn't have any title contenders. 2018, Purdue and Michigan State were your best shots. Didn't happen. So it's tough, but I think it's kind of a reality for the Big Ten that the style that's played in the Big Ten probably isn't the most conducive to NCAA tournament success, but that's the style you have to play to compete in the Big Ten to some degree. It's like the hamster on the wheel in his cage. You're running, but you're not getting anywhere because of the situation you're in. You have to be able to compete in the Big Ten first, and you're not necessarily setting yourself up for the NCAA tournament the best way. Why did this team never improve on their weaknesses? And the question referenced toughness, effort, and ball security. I think toughness is a personality thing more than something you can improve, like an attribute. Like if you're playing 2K, you can improve your shooting, you can improve your dribbling, but I don't know that toughness is something you really improve. That's a between the ears thing. Effort, I'm not here to criticize this team's effort. I don't know they were the most gritty team. You didn't see them diving after a ton of loose balls, but I don't take that to mean that this team didn't care or didn't play hard. Ball security is the one that there's a lot to go off of, but at the same time, you look at the turnovers this year, 237 out of your 435 turnovers, that's over 54% of Purdue's turnovers, came from Jaden Ivey, Travion Williams, and Zach Edey. Those are your three best players, and they're just more turnover prone in nature. Jaden Ivey plays very fast. That's going to lead to some turnovers. Travion Williams attempts a lot of dangerous passes. That's going to lead to a lot of turnovers. Zach Edey is young. He's still not a finished product by any means. He doesn't have great hands. He's going to turn the ball over. So, yes, that could have gotten better, but to some degree, that's just how Purdue's personnel stacked up for them to play. Who's going to stay or leave outside of the seniors? Obviously, you lose Eric Hunter, Sasha Stefanovic, Travion Williams. We'll talk about that more next week. Sneak peek, Ivy, gone. Edey, I think he's going to declare. I think he'd be a fool not to. I think he'll ultimately come back. I don't know that it makes sense for any of Purdue's players to transfer. You never know. You have no idea what's coming there. Crazy things happen a lot when it comes to the transfer portal. So no idea there. We'll talk plenty about that stuff next week. And then a question. I don't think Painter needs to be fired. No, he does not. But does he need to change? What changes need to be made? You know, coaches are always looking to grow and improve. They're a group that loves learning because the game is always evolving. I don't like the notion that Matt Painter's stubborn or refuses to change, because we saw him change a lot when he went from, really recruiting a high level of athlete, a Ronnie Johnson, an Anthony Johnson, a Jacob Lawson, if you want some names there, a Basil Smotherman, to more of a skilled player, a Ryan Klein, a Dakota Mathias, Sasha Stefanovic, and that improved the results of the team dramatically. You've won 2 Big Ten championships since then. You've been to 4 Sweet 16s and an Elite 8 since then. That's helped you. I think if in a perfect world, you'd like to strike a balance between that offensive skill and better defensive ability, maybe a little more athleticism. It's easier said than done. Guys that are great shooters, that are good at putting the ball on the floor and getting to the rim, are good defenders, don't turn the ball over a lot. Unicorns are hard to find. It's easier said than done. I am sure there will be adjustments made. I don't know that this is the exact same way Purdue is going to try to play, for the next 10 years. But, it's been effective. Purdue still has won a lot of games lately. And, they lost to a team that they shouldn't have. But that's basketball to some degree. And no, Matt Painter's not going to be fired. Matt Painter should not be fired. That is... It's been thrown around a lot. It won't happen. I don't think it should happen. I don't think there's an athletic director in America who would fire Matt Painter right now. And I even think that's the case in the SEC, where ADs are willing to fire coaches for about anything. And then a question to close out with, because it's going to be answered next week. Is next year going to be a down year, or does the team have the talent to get back to the Sweet 16 or further? Appreciate the question. Kyle, thank you for sending that in, but it's going to be a next week question. We will answer that next week. Thank you to all of you guys for listening this season. I know it ended disappointingly. I know not many of you are listening to this episode very happy with what I've said for the last 54 minutes here, but I appreciate you all listening to the show, interacting with me on Twitter, just killing time together and talking about Purdue sports. It's been a fun year to some degree. Football was a lot of fun. Basketball has had some moments that have been really fun to talk about. I appreciate it. Share the show. That's the best thing you can do. Just tell your friends about it. Maybe some Boiler fans want to hear more perspective on how this season ended, so send them this way. But thank you so much. You guys are the ones that make this show possible. That's all we have for today. As I said, next week we're going to look ahead. We'll turn the page on this season and look ahead. 6 new players becoming eligible to play for Purdue next year. They have scholarships open to go get guys out of the portal. plenty to talk about. So we will talk about that next week. Until then, follow the show on Twitter at Boilers Beyond. Subscribe to Boilers and Beyond wherever you get your podcasts. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode, we always will take positive reviews. Until next week, though, hey, try and enjoy the Final Four. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Good matchups, plenty of storylines. Enjoy it, and let's look ahead next week.